This is TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast, with your host, the Classic Rock Brainiac, yours truly, Terrence Reardon. Sit back and listen to me gush over albums that I love that either had an impact on my life or rock and roll in general, and be rest assured that there's no country or rap nonsense to be found here. So welcome to another exciting episode of TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome back, my friends, to the podcast that never ends. It's the Classic Rock Brainiac, Terrence Reardon, on another episode of TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast. A show which is gaining a lot of goodwill, a lot of good success, and I'm actually doing some live video feeds every now and again to promote the show. And on YouTube, my subscribers are growing because of my persistence. And the fact that I'm doing well is always a good thing. And today on the show, I figured I would go back into the vault for a old but new episode. When people say old but new, well, here's the story with this episode. Originally, back in 2017, I recorded an episode on this particular album by the Hammer of the Gods, better known as Led Zeppelin. Yep, you see it here, folks. On this particular album, which initially sold big, but then eventually wound up becoming their least successful album in later years. But at the time, it was a blockbuster at the time of its release, but then sales curtailed after a while. You know, it's one of those strange dichotomies where an album will sell lightning speed, and then eventually sales will cut off and tail off, because an album that didn't do well got a reappraisal, and sales of that failure picked up speed in later years. Of course, that's Led Zeppelin 3, but I'll talk about that in the future. But today I want to talk about an album that came out the year I was born, 1976. Hard to believe it'll be 50 years old since this album was released. Next year, the album called Presence. Yeah. I originally recorded this in 2017 with myself, and I had to use a computer to record. So I sounded like I was underwater. It was like, yeah, I sounded like that. I didn't like the way it came out, and the fact that I didn't have access to all the goodies and footage that I have now, and the fact that I was still trying to find my feet on my own after the fallouts of trying to do a podcast with people. I don't mind doing solo podcasts. Now, I love being a solo artist. I never wanted to be one, but I enjoy it. So then after I fell out with a certain podcast, I'm not going to name names, but you know what? I'll just call them by the code name that my name for them now, because I'm not going to call them by its real name, but I'll call them by my code name for them. The Podcast Queens. Yeah, the Podcast Queens got all bent out of shape, fell out during COVID. And then I had to pull down episodes. In the case of Presence, I erased it. I had to delete it because I just didn't like hearing my ex-guy that did my intro couldn't stand hearing his voice anymore, so I deleted it. I didn't delete all the episodes, but I had to cut out his voice of the intro, so now I don't have a reminder or about a PTSD hearing his voice. But I re-recorded this in 2021, trying to match what I did a few years before, and I actually got better, but still a little too much of the profane usage. I was still using a lot of profanity at that time. So now I went back. I still have the video I'm about to show you, the episode I'm about to air, and it's pretty much how it aired, but with a lot of profanities removed. And like with my wall episode and some episodes I've done, I've gone in and re-recorded bits and pieces to add some things to it which I did not have knowledge of at the time. I want to thank my good friend JCM Led Zeppelin Stories for helping me with some additional bits that I didn't know existed. So with an assist to him, I am going to add some more tidbits I did not add on the original review. I know I won't be able to do as well of a job as JCM. I mean, his Led Zeppelin channel is the Led Zeppelin channel on YouTube. He is to Led Zeppelin history what I am to Pink Floyd history. A rock historian who digs deep into the band's histories and gets down to the nitty and the gritty. And not only am I going to be talking about Presence, the album, but also going to gloss over The Song Remains the Same's release in the review. Eventually I might do an episode on The Song Remains the Same in full, or talk more about it on The Houses of the Holy, because it really was recorded during that time frame, but its release was in the 1976-77 frame, so I'll be talking a little bit about The Song Remains the Same release, and my opinion on my favorite live Led Zeppelin album. Yeah, stick that in your trophy case, How the West Was Won. The Song Remains the Same for the win. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about the 1977 tour, the Infamous Tour.
What does that mean, infamous?
Oh, Dusty. Infamous is when you're more than famous. This man, El Guapo, is not just famous, he's infamous.
Wow, the infamous? Infamous?
I had to throw that in, folks. A little warped sense of humor. That tour, which ended in disaster for the band. So without further ado, let me crank back the time machine and go back 4 years ago to the re-recorded version of Led Zeppelin's Presence, this time to include The Song Remains the Same, soundtrack and film, and 1977 tour, rolled into one to call it Led Zeppelin 1976-77 era. I know it's supposed to do Physical Graffiti, but I'll have to postpone that release until a later date, because I'm still working on other episodes, so for now, enjoy this old but new and updated version of Led Zeppelin's Presence, and my current self will be sprinkling in and out of the review as I see fit. Now on with the show. A very overlooked album from the British hard rock legends. First released in March 1976 in the US and UK on Swan Song here in America is catalog number SSH8416. Great memory. And the album was their hard rock record. Pretty much their heavy metal hard rock masterpiece. I think they topped Physical Graffiti as far as I'm concerned. And this album was recorded during a trying time in the band's life. You see, they were riding high on the success of Physical Graffiti in 1975, being guitarist, music writing extraordinaire Jimmy Page, and of course he was the producer of the band, lead singer, lyricist Robert Plant, bass player, keyboard player John Paul Jones, the unsung hero of the band, and the thundering, monstrous drummer, the late great John Bonzo Bonham. So they were riding high on huge success. But then in August 1975, tragedy struck. Robert Plant, while vacationing with his wife and kids, and Jimmy Page's daughter Scarlett, were involved in a near tragic car accident. It was actually Robert Plant almost died in it. Robert's then wife Maureen fractured her skull and broke her hip. Robert broke his ankle and his elbow. His two kids, Carmen and the late Carrick, both suffered from bad cuts and bruises. And only Jimmy Page's daughter, Scarlett, emerged unscathed. I don't know if there was that black magic going on with Jimmy Page at that stage, but very powerful shit. The accident was so bad, Robert Plant was unable to even walk for several months, and Led Zeppelin would not be on tour for 2 long years after that. And this was the first of several tragedies that would mark the beginning of the end of the band. And when Robert Plant was well enough to get better to record, Robert, Jimmy, Bonzo, and Jonesy all got together in California to rehearse during a convalescing holiday for Robert, and began work on rehearsing some new songs. And with a plethora of songs, the band decided to go to Germany as tax exiles to record their 7th studio album, Presence, in November of 1975. And The recording studio was called Musicland Studios. It was in the basement of the Arabella Hotel in Munich, Germany. And Jimmy Page once again produced the album, and the engineer on the album was the late Keith Harwood, who sadly would pass away 2 weeks before Mark Bolan in September of 1977 in a car accident induced by drugs, and on top of that was driving a similar car to the one that killed Mark Bolan. And one of the assistant engineers on the Presence album, although not credited, was Reinhold Mack. Yes, the same Mack that would record with Queen on their album The Game in 1980, and their albums Hot Space, The Works, A Kind of Magic, their live recordings from 1980 to 86, and also he did Billy Squier's two classic albums, Don't Say No and Emotions in Motion, and also Black Sabbath's Dehumanizer. Reinhold Mack was one great producer. Bringing the Zepp sound, his engineering, because he was one of the assistant engineers on the album, although he didn't take credit for it because he was not very happy with working with Keith Harwood, who was struggling with a heroin dependency. But Led Zeppelin were there to work, and they recorded and mixed the album in just 18 days, because the Rolling Stones were about to come back to Germany to finish recording their follow-up to It's Only Rock and Roll entitled Black and Blue, which would be released just a couple weeks after Presence. The Rolling Stones wanted the recording studio, and then Jimmy Page one day, called up and, actually Mick Jagger called Jimmy Page one day while the album was being finished. And Mick Jagger, I'm imagining the scenario of Mick and Jimmy talking, and Mick going, "Hey, Jimmy, how far on the record are you guys?" And Jimmy Page replied, "Mick, we're all done. Backing tracks? No, we're done with the whole thing. Guitars, vocals, all the parts are done." "Oh, fuck. We should not take forever making records again. Shit, Led Zeppelin did the new record in 18 days. Fuck." Yeah, and one of the tricks to get the thing done in 18 days was that Jimmy Page would stay up for 48 hours recording overdubs for his guitar parts, including guitar solos, all done. And the whole album was done in 18 days. And they were going to call the album Thanksgiving. But the joke would have been lost on the public, so the album Presence was called Presence because the band had such a huge presence in the rock and roll scene. And the album cover was done by the legends, by those graphic artists at Hypnosis, who are very famous for their series of classic Pink Floyd album covers and Genesis album covers. And George Hardy created that weird obelisk-shaped object that appears on the front, back, and gatefold sleeves of the album. And it was that object was simply called The Object. It was intended to represent the band's force and presence. And Storm Thorgerson stated in his book that the obelisk represented the power of Led Zeppelin, saying they were so powerful they didn't even need to be there. And both Page and Plant stated that the presence of the object in the photographs made people stop and think about what's real, which reflected in the music. And the background in the cover photograph is a fake marina that was installed at London's Earl's Court, where the band had played a series of shows earlier that year. And it was taken at the annual boat show in the winter of 75-76, although it says 74-75, but it was 75-76. That object, let's just say, was all over the place, and the models that appeared on the back cover of the Presence album, the two kids, would later resurface as models on the inside of the Pink Floyd album The Division Bell. If you look at the booklet on the pages for Coming Back to Life, you'll see some familiar faces, older and wiser, and it was those same two kids that appeared on the back sleeve of the Presence album. There they were 18 years later, once again models for Storm Thorgerson. So yeah, strange twist of fate that Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd would cross paths with the same album cover firm, Hipgnosis, and Storm Thurgerson using those same models again 18 years later. And then, of course, taking old photos from like Time magazine and inserting the obelisk, which was designed by George Hardy, a man who was a graphic artist at Hipgnosis. He was one of the more graphic designers. And just an amazing form of art. And then inside the gatefold, the inner sleeve, you have two pictures of what you call the obelisk. And it was just one of the coolest things I had ever seen, but I had no clue what the hell it was when I first heard the album. When I was, how old was I when I first heard this album? 9 years old, yeah. I was on, if I'm not mistaken, 3rd November 1985. It was a Saturday evening. I remember this vividly. Getting into Led Zeppelin because of Live Aid, which was their first performance after the death of drummer John Bonham, which saw Genesis drummer Phil Collins and the late Tony Thompson, who played with the Power Station, and David Bowie, among others, on drums, and more famously the disco act Chic, on the drums for that performance. And although Jimmy Page's guitar was out of tune, the performance wowed me so much that I went into a Zeppelin binge. Kept stealing my sister Tanya's cassette copies of Led Zeppelin 2 and Led Zeppelin 4, to the breaking point where, eventually my mom bought me my own copies of those. And then the first album outside of those, two of those behemoths that I first owned, was Presence, because the album cover just caught my fancy one day. So then on the 3rd of November 1985, for being a well-behaved kid, my mom bought me the cassette. And was ecstatic to see that the album entered my equation, and I wound up acquiring it on just the cover alone because it was just so amazing. Plus, there was only 7 songs on it, and I knew one of the songs was going to be a long-ass song. Turns out that the album is bookended with 2 long songs exceeding over 8 minutes. The opening and closing tracks clocked in at over 10 and a half, one at 10.5 minutes, the closing 9.5 minutes. And the album is like 44 minutes, some odd seconds, and this was one of the few cassettes where they didn't alter the track listing on the tape, because side 1 of the cassette was like 19.5 minutes long, side 2 was like 23 or 24 minutes long. But I didn't give a shit. From the go, hearing this as a 9-year-old kid, a 9-year-old boy, this album knocked my ass out. And sadly, over time, the album did not. Although it was a fast seller, in time it became sort of overshadowed by a number of different things, including the concert film that came out the same year as this album, which I'll bring up when I'm done with Presence. So, what do I think of the songs in this album? Well, since I spoiler said I love every damn song on it, let's get into the songs in the album, shall we? Excuse me, I say, let's do so. So we begin proceedings with a song that clocked in at 10.5 minutes called Achilles' Last Stand, which as a 10-year-old kid, and I'm going on 10-year-old boy, I mispronounce as Achilles. Yeah, I pronounce it Achilles. Shows you how developed my 9-year-old brain was. Forgive me. But as I learned about Achilles tendons, Achilles heels, the thing about history and Greek mythology, I had to learn the proper pronunciation as I got older. When you're a small kid, you easily mispronounce things. I figured I'd share that to show my sense of humor. So anyway, Achilles' Last Stand is the opening song. It begins with a myriad of Jimmy Page guitar overdubs, which he painstakingly did all of them on his Gibson Les Paul. He did not use the double neck on this track, much to popular opinion. It's all his Gibson Les Paul and a few Fender Stratocaster tracks. And this song was based on Middle Eastern music and Greek mythology. And after the guitar things come in, the drums kick in, and this featured John Bonham's best recording studio drum track. This is him playing aggressively like a madman. And a lot of people like, John Bonham must have been pooped after this. Well, he had the stamina. Well, he needed just one bass drum to get through the, to play his drum kit, because he briefly experimented with two bass drums, but Robert Plant was like, he doesn't need two. Just give him the one bass drum. He can do more with one kick drum than many drummers could do with two. And the song was originally in its working title as I'm trying to remember here, Two Ones Are One. Yeah, Two Ones Are One was its working title. And then it turned into Achilles' Last Stand. And although the lyrics uses the Greek mythology and William Blake's Albion and the Atlas myth and the Greek hero Achilles, the theme of the lyrics centered around the group's travels during exile. It was an April morning when they thought that we should go. As I turn to you, you smile at me. How could they say no? The lyrics are just basically talking about being away. Robert Plant being away from his family, which he had to be to avoid the English tax bracket, which back then was brutal. And Jimmy Page on this track just soloing his ass off with the Gibson Les Paul, John Bonham drumming his ass off, John Paul Jones using an 8-string bass guitar, which has that thundering gallop, which Iron Maiden would then bleed would take to the bank, literally. And I think Steve Harris heard that gallop that John Paul Jones was doing, although John Paul Jones used the pick to create that gallop. And, of course, Hart would borrow that for Barracuda. Yeah, the song inspired that song, believe it or not. Most people don't believe that, but yes. Achilles' Last Stand had an effect on Hart, as did much of Led Zeppelin's catalog. And the title is an ironic reference to Robert Plant's car crash in which he severely injured his ankle as Achilles was brought down by an arrow to his calcaneal tendon, which left Plant unable to walk for several months, and recorded all of his vocals were recorded in a wheelchair. So it was originally called Two Ones Are One, and prior to that it was called the Wheelchair Song. And Led Zeppelin biographer Martin Popoff, who is a favorite on the Sea of Tranquility's videos, said, quote, Albin's a Blake reference, but it's also an ancient name for what would become England. The Atlas Mountains, which span Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, are also referenced, but through a nice twist. The lyric directly to Atlas instead, the god who held the earth on his shoulders. Within, Robert Plant also relates his travels in Athens, Spain, Montreux, Jersey, and California, as well as one internalizes from within travel, wondering, all that is concern for the mighty arms of Atlas, the heavens of the earth, and just amazing. Robert Plant singing much of the song in one part, and then Robert Plant singing a bunch of epic vocal things, and there's some bits where his voice is double-tracked. Jimmy Page, a few minutes in, does his first guitar solo, which he just goes completely batshit. Yeah, basically proving that he had a fire in him to do that amazing guitar solo. And then John Bonham's drum fill's going, and his Jimmy Page is going, and it's just so fucking amazing, this song. Oh my god. You'd be singing that fucking song for days. And yeah, Robert Plant, and then, of course, there was a brief slide guitar solo part in the song, which, of course, Jimmy Page would then just, when they did this live, which they did it in 1977, 79, and 80, Jimmy Page would just use his fingers and just shredding over it. And, Robert Plant scatsing and doing that. Brilliantly, I might add, not boring you for the 10.5 minutes this song is, and then the da dun 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 dun, and then Jimmy Page doing more guitar fills as John Bonham's doing that batshit drumming, and then a repeat of the mighty arms of Atlas, the heavens of the earth, and then Robert Plant going, doing ooh, as he's going, underneath. My God, does this song roll. And then it ends like it begins with the arpeggiating guitars, which were overdubbed, and that's not a 12-string, it's all his Gibson Les Paul, by the way. And this song was only one of two songs from the album to have been played live during Led Zeppelin's existence as a band. This song was played regularly on the 1977 North American tour after Jimmy Page's violin bow guitar solo spot, which was actually a guitar solo / theremin solo / violin bow guitar solo, which ended with flange on John Bonham's gong, which he hit with his bare hand, and then right into the song Achilles' Last Stand after Jimmy Page threw the violin bow into the crowd. And yeah, they played the song in 1977, every show on that ill-fated tour. A lot of great performances of it, though. My favorite happened to be from Largo, Maryland, 77. One of the performances where Jimmy Page did not fuck up. Although in one performance, John Bonham came in early with the drums, but he quickly rebounded. But hey, that's probably my favorite live version from 77. Robert Plant singing his ass off, John Paul Jones using an alembic 8-string bass guitar, Jimmy Page using his Gibson Les Paul, the famed Les Paul that he used, and John Bonham with that 5-piece Ludwig drum kit with the Paiste cymbals and gong to bring it all home, and Robert Plant singing his balls off. And then the live version was released, recorded in 1979 at Knebworth on the Led Zeppelin DVD, so they did both Knebworth shows in 79, and then this song appeared in their set list in 1980 on the band's European tour, and this probably would have been played on their 1980 North American tour had if John Bonham not passed away. Well, before we go into the next track, I want to finish up Achilles' Last Stand by saying this wheelchair song is one of the greatest Led Zeppelin epics in the history of mankind, A. B, the band thought of it so highly that they played it live on every concert from 1977 all the way to 1980. And on the 1977 tour, they played this song after Jimmy Page's guitar solo spot, which had him shredding his guitar, then the theremin, then more guitar pyrotechnics, then the violin bow, and then that 11-minute guitar solo was the intro on the 1977 tour to Achilles' Last Stand. So he played it as, my buddy JCM calls it, a 20-minute progressive rock piece. And yeah, and now to think of it, yeah, the way they did in 77, it's to be played as one 20-minute suite. The violin bow, guitar solo, into Achilles' Last Stand. Man, oh man. A lot of great performances from that 77 tour. Even some blooper performances, but killer. And this song, as far as compilations go, eventually surfaced on the Pizza Box Volume 1, which is the first Led Zeppelin box set released in 1990. And then again, it surfaced on the Remasters compilation, which is Poor Man's box set. As my buddy JCM calls the Remasters 2 CD set, Poor Man's box set. And then it was on Mothership in 2007. And it was also on The Latter Days in 2000. So yeah, Led Zeppelin's Achilles' Last Stand has appeared on just about every compilation that the band released. And the band played it countless times. And actually was one of their main staple concert songs for many years. And the live version does appear on the Led Zeppelin DVD, released in 2003, performed at Knebworth. Although that performance was great, the 1977 ones with that killer John Bonham drumming school clinic, amazing. Now on to the next track. Now we get to the next track, which is another Page Plant compilation, For Your Life, which Jimmy Page used a Fender Stratocaster on the track, and Robert Plant wrote the lyrics about the dangers of being on drug, the band partying, groupies, and in your head. And the guitar riff is just my God. Oh my goodness. This, don't you get it in your head? Don't you want cocaine, cocaine, cocaine? As I have to look up the lyrics to this track, and it basically was Robert Plant preaching about the evils of drugs, especially the evils of cocaine, which many of his bandmates were doing a lot of in those days. Oh my God. Basically talking about a groupie who wanted the drugs. You say I was the only with my lemon in your hand, referencing his penis. And it criticizes the use of drugs, most notably cocaine, which it is directly referenced in its lyrics. It was inspired by a female friend of Robert Plant's who had ruined her life by abusing drugs. The track is quite venomous toward the subject, and, especially the "Don't you want cocaine, 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 hadn't planned to, could not stand to, try it, fry it," and then her cry for mercy in the city of the damned, down to the pits you go no lower, the next stop underground, oh hello underground, wine roses ain't quite over, fate deals a losing hand, did not mean to fail, you didn't plan it, you overran, into the third verse, which changes key from G minor to A minor, bum ba dun 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 dun. You want to do it when you want to, when you blow it, babe, you gotta blow it right. Oh baby, if you fake it, mama, fake with all your might when you fake it. Oh my God. For your life, do it when you wanna. And also like the dong do 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 bum ba bum ba da 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 da. The song is just so all over the place musically speaking, but my God, there's a song roll. And Jimmy Page does another batshit guitar solo, this time using the Fender Stratocaster. This is one of the 2 songs in the album where he used the Stratocaster as the lead guitar, not only for the rhythm guitar, but also the lead guitar as well, which is a Stratocaster, because the whammy bar stuff is noted on this song. And then the last verse is the condemning of cocaine use. On the balance of a crystal pain through the nose, and then you hear a audible snorting sound effect towards the end of the second half of the song, which was a sound effect of a cocaine snort. This was due to Plant's observation of the excessive amount of cocaine which had now pervaded and ruined the music scene in L.A., which he had stayed as a tax exile prior to the recording of the Presence album. For Your Life, oh my God, the song, what is else there to be said about it, but a great song. There's not much more I can add to For Your Life, but a killer track with all the killer stuff. Well, before we go into the next track, I want to sum up For Your Life with the fact that the band thought of it highly enough to include on their first box set, which was the Pizza Box, Led Zeppelin Box Set 1 in 1990. And then eventually the band saw fit to finally play the song live in 2007 at the Celebration Day O2 Arena reunion gig with Jason Bonham on drums. For some reason, I think because Jimmy Page used the Fender Stratocaster, and Stratocasters had a notorious reputation of going out of tune if you whammy barred like Hendrix, it would have been a nightmare to play with tuning issues. But the master of the Stratocaster in my mind is David Gilmour of Pink Floyd, of course, because he found ways to make sure that his Stratocaster would not go out of tune with putting some lock things into his whammy so the whammy would not get his guitar out of tune, because he whammy barred quite a bit, but found ways to make sure that his Stratocaster would not ever go out of tune, because that was his main guitar, the Black Strat in the classic Pink Floyd era. Didn't mean to bring them into the review, but figured I'd explain why the band really didn't play For Your Life back then. But then in 2007, they played it at the O2. Jimmy Page used the Black Beauty Les Paul of his, which worked very, very well. And For Your Life does appear on box set number 1. For Your Life owns not much more I can add. Now we come to the end of side 1 of the Presence album, which is called Royal Orleans, which is the only song on the album written by the band. It was the B-side to one of the songs on side 2 as a single. The track I will tell you when I get to it. And Royal Orleans, which has the thing of da 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 dun da da dun da 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 da. What a great tune this is. It's talking about one of the band's famed explorations in New Orleans. And so be careful how you use it. Make it last all night. Take your pick. Be careful how you choose it. Make it feel alright. Man I know went down to Louisiana, had himself a bad fight, and when the sun peeked through John Cameron with Susanna, he kissed the whiskers left and right. Oh my God. And the song talks about a night that John Paul Jones, the bass player, brought a woman from the bar up to his hotel room, unaware that she was a sweet transvestite from sweet Transylvania. Oh my God. Both smoked weed and fell asleep, and the transvestite, with a lit joint in her hand which caught fire and burned the room down, which everyone escaped. The lyrics include the line, "Be careful how you choose it," and "Poor whiskers set the room alight," to reference the event. And, of course, it alludes that it was John Paul Jones, was the John Cameron with Susanna. He kissed the whiskers left and right, and was also a studio rival of John Paul Jones. And, of course, the guitar solo from Jimmy Page was short and sweet, and right to the plot, right to the point, and just amazing. Then the bridge after the guitar solo, "Down on Bourbon Street, you know it's right, you can see my friend," and they run on all through the night. "Most everywhere until the closet's bare, run for the razor burn, doing up my hair." And then the final verse kicked in, and "New Orleans queens sure know how to schmooze it. Maybe for that seems alright when I step out, strut down with my sugar. She'd best not talk like Barry White." Oh my God. Yeah, Barry White, the soul singer who sounded like he was possessed by Satan. Yes, he had the voice of the devil. You must remember that, folks. And in an interview given with Mojo magazine in 2007, Jonesy clarified the reliability of the rumor, stating, quote, "The transvestites were friends of Richard Cole, who was the band's tour manager. Normal, friendly people, and we were all at some bar. That I mistook a transvestite for a girl is bullshit that happened in another country to somebody else. Anyway, Stephanie ended up in my room. We rolled a joint or two, and I passed out and set fire to the hotel room as you do. And when I woke up, it was full of firemen." And the song, like I said, thank goodness for Genius.com with its lyrics helping me with the backstory, because I've been banned from Wikipedia for life, which is a badge of honor I wear. Thank the good Lord for that. Anyway, Royal Orleans at 3 minutes, or just under. Shortest song in the album, but still a catchy song. A lot of people may call it a filler, but I call it killer filler, meaning if it owns. Or as the military, or as the Marine Corps would say, recon, it kicks Major Recon ass. Oorah! Yeah, oorah! Rally call for awesome. The rally cry of the Marine Corps. And those who don't understand the military, get your ass out of America. If you're not patriotic and like my show, get the fuck out of here. Royal Orleans, great song. Before we go into side 2, I just want to sum up saying Royal Orleans is a great tune. A little short, but not short on ideas. And yeah, the vocal on the finished product is Robert Plant, but the work in progress vocal, that's John Bonham. That is no way in hell Robert Plant singing like that dude Dr. John. No way, Jose. Because Dr. John would have been like, "Right place, wrong time." John Bonham, just being a wise guy, was a big fan of Dr. John. So I think he had a crack at the vocal, and then Robert Plant's like, "Nah, they're not going to take it seriously." So then Robert Plant went in and re-sang it with his range that he was beginning to harness after that nodule surgery, which changed his voice forever. But the song is great. I digs it. And this song was on box set number 2, the smaller box set, and a work in progress mix, just like the previous 2 tracks, appears as a bonus track on the Presence Deluxe Edition. So now let's flip the album over, shall we? Let's do it. Now you had to fast forward moments of side 1 to get to the beginning of side 2, and we get to the song Nobody's Fault But Mine, which was originally a gospel blues tune by Blind Willie Johnson, which had Blind Willie Johnson playing dobro, and it was interpreted and rumored, and it's nobody's fault but mine. Tells of a spiritual struggle with reading the Bible as the path to salvation. And this song, his version was like, so-so. But then Led Zeppelin recorded a version for Presence, which they turned it into hard, heavy metal, beginning with a myriad of Jimmy Page guitar tracks, which were recorded all inflanged to death, as my phone goes off, and it's like the whooshing sound, which was shorter on the original LP, but on the remastered CD, it's extended by, you get a 15-second extended intro on the remastered CD. On the remastered CD that's out now, it clocks in at 6.5 minutes, beginning with the flanged guitar and Jimmy Page's guitar tracks, which were multiple tracked of guitars, and Robert Plant's flanged and delayed as Jimmy Page is doing the thing, and the Page, like I said, and Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were credited as writing the song, but Blind Willie Johnson wrote the original lyrics, but Page and Plant arranged it to make it a Zeppelin track. And then all of a sudden, Bonzo's drums come in, Jonesy's 8-string alembic bass, with Jimmy Page's and Bonham just going batshit on the drums. And Robert Plant screaming his vocals from a wheelchair. Nobody's fault but mine. Nobody's fault but mine, yeah. Gotta save my soul tonight. So nobody's fault but mine. Diddly-diddly-doo. Oh my God. The devil told me to go roll. Devil, he taught me to roll. Whoa, whoa. Oh my God. And in this song, Led Zeppelin's version of Nobody's Fault But Mine, my God, is if I own, kick a lot of ass. And then the section comes in again with Bonzo and Jonesy going bum 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 ba dun dun. Oh my God. And they just kick a lot of ass with it. And then Robert Plant comes in with a harmonica solo, which he just wails. It's the first song since Black Country Woman on the previous album that he uses the harmonica. And this is, to me, I think, his best harmonica solo on a Led Zeppelin recording. Yes, I said it. Plant's best harmonica solo out of them all. And then he does the solo very brilliantly. And then the third verse comes in, and brother, he showed me the gong. Brother, he showed me the ding-dong, ding-dong, how to kick that gong to light. And then it's nobody's fault but mine. And then diddle-diddle-doo. Oh, my God. And then the fourth and final verse, got a monkey on my back. Mama, monkey on my back. Got to change my ways tonight, which is basically, Robert Plant trying to overcome some of the drug dependencies he was dealing with at the time, and Jimmy Page just riffing his ass off, and then nobody's fault but mine, and then Jimmy Page does that blistering guitar solo, which he just shreds, and that's the Gibson Les Paul he uses on the studio track, and he's just shredding like no tomorrow. And just going batshit with the guitar, soloing like it was going out of style, killing everyone with that guitar solo. And I think it's one of his best guitar solos. And then into the final like it was in the middle of the song, which preceded the harmonica solo, with Bonzo and Jonesy again adding syncopated accents during the repetitions of that again, or repeat of that section. Boom, bum, bum, ba ba bum, bum. And then the ending, how they kick that gong to light. No, 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 nobody's fault. And you could tell Billy Squier was heavily influenced by that fucking song. Because if you listen to Lonely as the Night on Don't Say No, you could tell he was a huge Led Zeppelin fan. And of course, one of the assistant engineers on the President's album, uncredited, was Reinhold Mack. So I think Mack was like, oh, you want to sound like Bonzo, huh? I think I know how to do that. So get that. Oh my god. Yeah, but my god, this song fucking owns. And the song was played live on Led Zeppelin's 1977 ill-fated North American tour, the second and last track from the album to be played, and was a regular component of Led Zeppelin performances all the way through 1980. And a live version was filmed and recorded at Networth 79 and is on the Led Zeppelin DVD from 2003. And a live version from Zurich, Switzerland was recorded and bootlegged live for radio broadcast, which aired on the Led Zeppelin 25th anniversary special back in 1993. You know, live versions from 77 were great, especially with Jimmy Page doing the batshit guitar solos, Bonham's drumming. And sadly, this was the last song on the album that got airplay live. But Nobody's Fault But Mine. My god, it's your fault if you don't like the song, because this song is fucking bludgeoning and taking the blues and making it metal. So yeah, some metal was rooted in the blues, especially this classic Mamma Jamma. And this song appears also on the Mothership, Latter Days, and Remasters compilation and Box Set 1, which was the first appearance of the extended Nobody's Fault But Mine with all 6.5 minutes. Because on the original vinyl record, the intro was shortened by 15 seconds. And that is all I can say about Nobody's Fault But Mine. Now, before we go into the next track, I just want to sum up that Nobody's Fault But Mine, one of the best songs in the album. And yeah, this song's appeared on countless compilations over the years. It appeared on Box Set 1, the Pizza Box, with the intro restored, which on many pressings of the album, from the time I heard it up until the box set came out, the intro was shorter. And then on the album, on the box set, they restored the intro in full, which is amazing. The song is great, killer, and JCM, Led Zeppelin Stories, my buddy, Jose, he was like, that bit in the middle, before the solos, that's progressive rock right there. So I'm like, I went back and listened to it, and I was like, he's right, because when Robert Plant and Jimmy Page were going da la da la da da, Bonzo and Jonesy were going ba 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 bum 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 ba 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 bum bum. That's like progressive rock right there. You'd be playing one thing with one instrument or something, and then you're playing a counter rhythm with the rhythm section. And John Bonham again, just kicking everybody right square in the ass with those drums of his. It's a shame we lost him. Bonzo was the king. Long live John Bonham, the greatest drummer whose left foot was a metronome. I think God gave him a metronome for a left foot rather than a left foot, because he didn't need two bass drums, because he could do hi-hat for like 10 minutes without the foot getting tired. Phil Rudd of AC/DC couldn't do that. Bonham, on the other hand, could do that. And this song's also appeared on Poor Man's box set, which is the Remasters 2 CD compilation. Then again on Latter Years, that CD. And then, of course, on Mothership. The 2007 remaster had the shortened intro, and then the 2015, 2016, or whatever remaster of Mothership has the version that's on the remastered version of Presence that came out in 2015, with the full intro and so forth and so on. Nobody's Fault But Mine, great song. Page and Plant thought of it highly enough to play it live after Led Zeppelin's demise. They played on every show from 1977 to 1980. It was a staple of the 1977 tour and the 1979 shows and the 1980 tour. So Led Zeppelin played it live on every tour from 1977 all the way to the end. And on top of that, they also had Jimmy Page and Robert Plant do the song again, this time more in the more traditional version of Nobody's Fault But Mine, which is on the No Quarter Unleaded album. And that's okay, but I prefer the one on Presence, because on Presence they just took it and turned a blues tune into heavy metal progressive rock greatness. You know, instead of going, it turned, you know, what they did. And then I guess they needed John Paul Jones for Unleaded in hindsight, because without John Paul Jones, you're missing the secret weapon. And then, of course, in 1999, Jimmy Page played Nobody's Fault But Mine with the Black Crowes. A live version appears on Live at the Greek. Killer version, I might add. And then John Paul Jones played it live on his Zuma tour, where he played pedal steel guitar as an instrumental, with his bass player playing a Chapman stick and the drummer doing his best John Bonham imitation. And then, of course, Led Zeppelin played it at the O2 for the 2007 reunion show, which was released as Celebration Day in 2012, although they lowered the key from E to D, but still a kick-ass version nevertheless. And any live version from 1977 to 80 kicks reconnaissance ass, as the Marine Corps would say. Ooh, rah. Now, on to the next track. Now we get to the next track, which is the only song in the album which featured an acoustic guitar buried in the mix, a song called Candy Store Rock, which was the only single released from the album, but did not do shit on the singles chart. And the song was played, was done in the style of 1950s rock and roll, and it's rockabilly. And Jimmy Page's guitar solos on it is very homage to Scotty Moore, Elvis Presley's old guitarist, and Robert Plant's lead vocals were basically his homage to the King, to Elvis. Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, baby, baby, oh, baby, baby. Yeah, you can picture Elvis singing the fucking tune, because it has that Elvis Presley vibe. And yes, I think the King was cool. I know he may have been seen as a poser, but if it not for him, rock and roll wouldn't have gone mainstream. So it's Zeppelin paying homage to, there goes Elvis. Yo, King, thank you very much. Thank you, thank you. And ironically, this track came out a year and a half before the King met his maker, passed away. But this song, you know, like I said, was released as a single, but sadly, it did shit on the Billboard singles chart. In fact, it didn't even chart at all. But I loved the song. Robert Plant did the lead vocal again, whilst in a wheelchair. And Robert Plant looks at this song as his favorite song from the Presence album. You know, he openly stated on quite a few interviews that Candy Store Rock is his favorite song on the entire album. And the band was happy to do this, and Jimmy Page paying homage to one of his heroes, Scotty Moore, and also James Burton, Elvis Presley's guitarists. So it has that Elvis Presley vibe. And the difference was John Paul Jones used an electric bass guitar rather than a stand-up bass, and John Bonham did his drumming a little more controlled rather than bombastic, and using the ride cymbal's bell and the snare drum. Robert going, ooh, ooh, it's alright, it's alright. Oh my god. And Robert Plant, of course, like I said, loves this song and Achilles' Last Stand as his two favorite songs of the Presence album. And I said the song's rhythm section, which was Jonesy and Bonham, was inspiring to him. And in a retrospect, in a review for Presence at the time of its release, Stephen Davis, who wrote the band's biography Hammer of the Gods, as, quote, perfectly evoking the L.A. milieu in which the Zepp composed the Presence album. He further described the song as sounding like an unholy hybrid in which Buddy Holly is grafted on to the quivering stem of David Bowie, end quote. I disagree with him because, you know, to me it sounds more like Elvis Presley, for goodness sake. It doesn't have a Buddy Holly vibe. It had more of that Elvis vibe. Yeah, Elvis, the king of rock and roll. You know? And Candy Store Rock, great song. In fact, the band held it in high regard. That they put this song on the compilation album, the Led Zeppelin box set 1. Yeah, the fourth and final song from the album that appeared on the first box set. Because if I'm not mistaken, Royal Orleans and then the next two tracks were on box set 2. But Candy Store Rock, great song. I know a lot of people don't like it, but if they don't like it, well, I think it's awesome. And that's all I got to say about Candy Store Rock. Candy Store Rock, before I go into the next song, did surface on a K-Tel compilation in 1980, which, if you remember those K-Tel compilations, they had the real songs from real bands back in the day. This is before record company politics sort of ruined those types of compilations, but yeah, the song was on one of those compilations, which also featured Rock and Roll Fantasy by Bad Company, Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd, and apparently this record was done for charity and released for charity purposes, and, the band had a charitable heart. And on top of that, the song was on box set 1, aka the Pizza Box, in a killer representation of 4 songs from Presence on the first box set. And sadly, it didn't do squat as a single, like I said in the review. But in my equation, I think it's great. I love it when Robert Plant does his Elvis Presley imitation. And of course, this was one of the last things that Page and Plant played together before the partnership came to an end at a concert somewhere in Montreux in 2001. And they played it greatly, I might add. That version of Candy Store Rock that they did, which you can see on YouTube, is killer ass kicking, and I wished Zeppelin had played it, although Robert Plant did sing a tiny bit of it before going into one of the songs on the tour. I think it was Cincinnati, he sang a tiny bit of it. And it was, Robert Plant's homage to his hero, the greatest, arguably the greatest singer that ever walked the face of the earth, Elvis, pardon my language, fucking Presley. And I know one of the podcast queens loathes Elvis Presley. I'm not going to name his name. But anyone who doesn't like Elvis, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Because if it wasn't for Elvis Presley, Robert Plant would not have gotten into the rock and roll game. Because Robert heard Elvis as a kid and he was just like, oh man. And Robert Plant even said meeting Elvis was one of the greatest highlights of his life. And you can watch JCM's Led Zeppelin and Elvis Presley connection of 1977 for more context on the Led Zeppelin Elvis Presley parallels of 1977 and how both tours ended in tragedy. Now back to the Presence review already in progress, into the next track. Now we get to one of the best songs in the album, a Page Plant composition called Hot's On For Nowhere, which was the second song in the album, which featured Jimmy Page on Fender Stratocaster. And of course, the song was a familiar nod to the band's earlier roots, a folk rock, hard rock, blues rock mix with an upbeat tune and carefree lyrics that carry heavy meaning due to Plant's condition at the time and he was experiencing a lot of pain and agony whilst recording the album. And then the first verse of the song was, I was burned in the heat of the moment, though it could have been the heat of the day. And when I learned how my time had been wasted, tear fell as I turned away. I got friends who will give me their shoulder when I should happen to fall. Time and his bride growing older, and I've got friends who will give me fuck all. So this was the first and only time that Robert Plant used the naughty profanity on a Led Zeppelin song. Because every other Led Zeppelin song, you didn't hear Robert Plant using an F-bomb or whatever. This was the first and only time, and back in the 70s, to hear an F-bomb on a song was like taboo to hear. You're like, whoa, he just said the F word. Because when the lyrics escaped me when I was 9 years old when I first heard this album, because the music intrigued me. But then years later, I was like, he couldn't have said a naughty word. Then I went on one of the lyric sites, and there it was. I was like, son of a bitch, you learned something new, especially with the way it was mixed. The way he said fuck all, it was sounded like fluck all. Fluck, F-L-U-C-K. It doesn't sound like fuck all. But you learned something new, ladies and gentlemen. And then the second verse was, corner of bleaker and nowhere in the land of not quite day. A shiver ran down my backbone, facing the mirror turns gray. So I looked around to hitch up the reindeer, searching hard to try to brighten my day. I turned around to look for the snowman, and my surprise, he'd melted away. And then I repeated the chorus of the la 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 la, yeah. And then the third verse is, as the moon and the stars call the order, with Jimmy Page doing the do-do-do-do-do, inside my tides dance the ebb and sway, do-do-do-do, the sun of my soul sinking slower. while the hope in my hands turned to clay, and then John Bonham going boom, ba 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 bum, ba ba bum, ba 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 bum during the third part of the third verse, and then it repeated the chorus, the la 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 chorus, and then the bridge going oh 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 for 4 measures, and then Jimmy Page unleashing a guitar solo using his Fender Stratocaster, where he just goes completely ballistic with the Fender Stratocaster. This is the second and final song on the album. He used the Fender Strat as his main guitar on the song, but my God, does this song, the solos are amazing. And then on the final verse, which is Lost on the Path to Attainment, Searching the Eyes of the Wise, John Bonham's drum shuffle goes from boom 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 da 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 to like a drum shuffle. Searching the eyes of the wise, when I bled from the heart of the matter, I started bleeding without a disguise. Now everything's fine under heaven, oh my God. And then the final la 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 la, and then the outro, hey babe, oh, hey babe, oh, hey babe, oh my God. I'm reading, do you really want to help me? Yeah. And that thing, which is very catchy, and then all of a sudden it has like a fake ending, and then it kicks back in with a boom-a-doo-doo. Now let me tell you now, babe, oh, let me tell you, oh, that it feels, oh my God. And then it properly ends with after him going, feels so good, oh yes, bum, see him singing the thing because it's so catchy. Forgive me, O Lord, for sinning in your name. Great fucking tune. Anything else to add to Hot Song for Nowhere? Overlooked, not ever played, but I love the tune. Hot Song for Nowhere, great track. In fact, a work in progress mixed with some differences does appear on the deluxe edition of Presents, which I highly urge you check out. And of course, the song appears on the smaller Led Zeppelin box set 2 in a remastered version, which sounds great for the time anyway. And then remastering got better and better as time wore on. But, Hot Song for Nowhere, great track. The only track in Led Zeppelin's history to use a profanity, but that's okay. I had to use that profanity because it was part of the lyric. And on top of that, the song was played by Jimmy Page with the Black Crowes in 2000 on their last tour when they opened up for The Who, and arguably the Black Crowes and Jimmy Page gave The Who a run for their money. I think Pete Townsend got jealous that Jimmy Page kicked his ass every night. What do you think, folks? Townsend always had a hatred for Zeppelin. I think it's because Led Zeppelin were more popular than The Who, sold more albums than The Who, had every album but 2 go to number 1 in America, whereas The Who never had a number 1 album in the States. Led Zeppelin, 6 number 1 albums in their active run as a band. You can't complain about that. And then years later, they would have another number 1 album in 2003 with a Live from the Vault recording. So Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page. If you don't like Jimmy Page, get the hell out of here. Jimmy Page rules. Hot Song for Nowhere, that song rules. It's awesome. I loves it. I digs it. Now let's go into the swan song of Presents. Let's do so. Now we get to the closing song on the album, T for One, which, when you hear the beginning, it sounds like it's going to be a hard rockin' blues, a hard rockin' tune with a, kind of another Kashmir, this time with bass guitar. With Bonzo's drumming, doing a drum track reminiscent of Kashmir with Jimmy Page doing a guitar solo as John Paul Jones is going anchoring the bass, and all of a sudden, after a few bars, it just kicks into the song, which is in waltz time, 6/4, which is bum dun 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 dun, and then Jimmy Page just soloing his ass off. And the song T for One is in the same chord progression as the 1970 Led Zeppelin track Since I've Been Loving You. And Jimmy Page, who wrote the music, wanted to do the same thing to see how much different of a band Led Zeppelin was from the time of Zeppelin 3. And the lyrics Robert Plant wrote were his feelings of homesickness whilst he was on tour. How come 24 hours, baby, sometimes seem to slip into days? A minute seems like a lifetime, oh baby, when I feel this way. Sitting, look at the clock clock, oh, time moves so slow, I've been watching for the hands to move until I just can't look no more. And then and then a repeat of the chorus, and then all of a sudden into the first guitar solo with the drums going ba-da-da-da, with that batshit thing, and then Page's guitar solo going completely ballistic. And Robert Plant's vocal delivery on this track, very calm and relaxed. You're thinking he was going to scream a la Since I've Been Loving You, but on this track, he does not scream at all. He's just singing very normal, reserved, and very reserved. Jimmy Page's guitar solo is just dominating. Bonham holding the drum part of 6/4, pretty much restrained on this track, with a few drum fills here and there, and drum fills. And Jonesy's bass playing just very simple but effective. And then the second verse, after a lengthy guitar solo, is to sing a song for you. I recall you used to say, oh baby, this one's for we two, which in the end is you anyway. And then the chorus again. And then the third and final verse was, there was a time that I stood tall in the eyes of other men, but by my own choice I left you, woman, and now I can't get back again. And then the highest note Robert Plant sings on this song is a B flat, which is just above middle C. Unlike the epic screams, which was an octave higher on Since I've Been Loving You in live form in 73 and the original recording back in 70. So Robert Plant's voice a little more, much older, much wiser. Sometimes seem to slip into days, well, then a minute seems like a lifetime, baby, when I feel this way, and then sings it again, and then the final I feel this way with an amazing guitar solo by Pagey to end this track, and in effect, end the album in such a grand, majestic way. And this song was not ever played live, believe it or not, by Led Zeppelin. I mean, sometimes Jimmy Page would insert a guitar solo fill from this track into performances of Since I've Been Loving You on the 1977 Led Zeppelin US tour. And this song was not ever played by Zeppelin, but it was played by Page and Plant on their 1996 Japanese tour, which was the Japanese leg of the Unleaded No Quarter tour, with an orchestra, which is just beautiful. It's a damn shame a live album of that tour was not ever officially made. There's plenty of bootleg videos out there, but it's kind of a lost opportunity that they did not ever do a proper live album of that tour. And it's a shame that Led Zeppelin really did not ever play songs from this album apart from Nobody's Fault and Achilles in live concerts. Of course, T for One, a perfect closer to this album, and also a perfect closer to Led Zeppelin box set number 2. And then, of course, Joe Bonamassa did a cover version of this in 2006, which featured John Bonham's son, Jason Bonham, on the drums. And yeah, at least you had the family connection, the Zepp connection right there. Joe Bonamassa with Jason Bonham, he can do no wrong. Because you needed Jason Bonham's thundering drumming, because he plays the drums just like his dad, John, God bless him. And that version, amazing. And Robert Plant and Jimmy Page actually played this one live in Japan quite a few times in 1996 towards the end of the Unleaded No Quarter tour. They should have played it in the U.S. I don't know why they didn't, but at least they finally got a chance to play the song live. But I think playing it live back in 1977 would have been not too good, because singing about homesickness and depression in a rock and roll concert context was like, not such a good idea, because people were there to party and have a good time, and then hearing a song like How Come 24 Hours, seems to slip into days, missing your loved one, your wife and children, homesickness. And all I can say is T for One, great track. Not only the closing song to Presence, but also the closing song on Led Zeppelin box set 2. So the band did think of it highly enough to include on the second box set. And on top of that, if I'm forced to pick this or Since I've Been Loving You, I'll go with this any day of the week, twice on Sunday, hearing a mature Robert Plant singing, because Since I've Been Loving You was early on in their career. This time around, it was just, it was a few years later. Disaster had struck, and the band were like, let's revisit Since I've Been Loving You, but give them like a start, a false intro, and a positive thing, and then give the fans a little mind you-know-what. But T for One, brilliant track. And that's all I got to say about that. And there was one other song that was recorded for the album, but was not used because it just didn't fit, although I think it's a beautiful track. It's called 10 Ribs and All, Carrot Pod Pod. Written in its original title was Pod, which was written by Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, which was basically a John Paul Jones piano concerto. And it worked beautifully. I mean, this instrumental, to me, if it had finished lyrics, it would have been a great addition to the album, because it would have fit, I think, perfectly at the end of side 1. But I think because in the days of vinyl records, you could only fit so much on an album. And Jimmy Page, didn't get a chance to finish the song. Robert Plant didn't get to write some lyrics. But this instrumental is beautiful. It's over 6+ minutes, or almost 7 minutes. And it was not released until 2015 on the deluxe edition of the album, which I will bring up upon many of the re-releases of the album. And the song is just so amazing. The instrumental was great. For the first minute, it's John Paul Jones' piano playing, and then Jimmy Page brings in some guitar parts, some electric guitars and some acoustic, and then John Bonham's drums come in. Just a beautiful instrumental that just hits you right to the bone every time you hear it. In fact, I put this on my version of Coda on my USB port for when I'm in the car driving, so I have this at the end of the album. Because to me, it would have fit on the album, and I would have had Nobody's Fault But Mine at the end of side 1 of the album, and put Pod at the end of side 2, which to me would have been a perfect addition to the album. But again, time constraints of the vinyl record just wasn't meant to be. Upon release, Presence entered the U.S. chart at number 2 on the Billboard album chart, and it went gold and platinum on the day of its release here in the United States. And the following week, it went to number 1 for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks in the spring of 1976. Compared to previous albums, it didn't sell as well, but actually, initially, it sold more copies than Led Zeppelin 3. Over time, this became their second least successful album, compared to, Into the Outdoor would outsell this album, but I love that album too. And Coda has only sold fewer copies than Presence. But Presence initially sold huge, and it was actually on the charts for like 35 or 36 weeks, so it wasn't really a flop. I mean, compared to what came before it sold less. But you got to remember, in 1976, the band did not tour to support the album, and the irony is, the album that kicked Presence out of number 1 was, the Rolling Stones' Black and Blue, which was recorded around the time of Presence. Talk about irony. The album, like I said, went platinum, and currently it's sitting at 2 or 3 million copies sold in the U.S. alone. And initially it sold more copies than Led Zeppelin 3, which, according to Robert Plant, was the least successful Led Zeppelin album originally, because the critics and fans were screaming for their blood, saying, what was that bullshit with the acoustic stuff? And Presence, which was a 180 from the acoustic stuff, it was hard rock, heavy metal, electric guitar, city all over the album. Some fans were dismayed that there was no balance of acoustic guitars. I mean, the only acoustic you hear is on Candy Store Rock. But the album has, over the years, been seen in high regard by fans like myself. It's my favorite Led Zeppelin album of all time. I don't care what anyone says. And this album has had a couple of remastered CDs released over the years. The first came out in 1994, when Jimmy Page and the late George Marino remastered the album for CD. And, my God, does that remaster sound brilliant. And then it was remastered again 6 years ago when this, along with In Through the Outdoor and Coda, were reissued as 2 CD, or in Coda's case 3 CD, deluxe editions, and LP or 2 LP, or in Coda's case 3 LP sets, and super deluxe box sets which had the CDs and the LPs together. And the bonus tracks on the said reissue were the reference mix of Achilles' Last Stand being 2 ones or 1, For Your Life rough mix, 10 ribs and all / carrot pod, which was the instrumental, with which was a rough mix of which would have fit on the album had it been finished, but Robert Plant, I don't think, wrote any lyrics for it. And then Royal Orleans with an alternate lead vocal sounding more like Dr. John. And a rough mix of Hot Song for Nowhere, which had some different vocals and different guitar parts compared to the original mix that's on the Presence album that we all know and love. But that was not the only thing Led Zeppelin released in 1976, because there was no... and on top of that, I also forgot to mention that the album cover was nominated for Best Album Package, but it lost to, if I'm not mistaken, hang on a second, Hypnosis got screwed again by Chicago 10 for their fucking asinine Hershey Bar album cover by John Berg. I can't disrespect the dead, but that album cover was crap, because the cover for Hypnosis, that for Presence, was royally shafted. Then again, Hypnosis was shafted the year before because the cover they did for Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here was nominated for Best Album Cover. That lost to Ohio Players' Honey, Jim Ladwig. I mean, that album cover was not that great. I mean, a woman having honey poured all over. Rumor had it that the woman was murdered, but who am I to be the judge and jury? And then the front cover, and then the album cover for Physical Graffiti was nominated for album cover package, but that got screwed. But the Zeppelin album covers have held up well, and some of those album covers that won, showing you how clueless the Grammys are. The album cover packages that that always won usually, those covers haven't held up. They look. And Presence is just top to bottom a black sheep in the Led Zeppelin camp, or Led Zeppelin catalog, the Led Zeppelin catalog, as I stutter like a motorboat, but a masterpiece of an album. And yeah, it's my favorite Led Zeppelin album. I know a lot of people may give me a hard time for it, but Presence stuck with me. I mean, that album, I don't know, it's just something about the album just resonated with me from the time I heard it as a 9-year-old to now almost 40 years since first heard this album. I still get enjoyment out of this darn thing. And it was because of Robert Plant's car accident, there was no tour to support the Presence album. So the band could not go out and do gigs to promote the album. So the band decided to go work on their concert film, The Song Remains the Same, which was released in October of 1976, along with its soundtrack album. And it was recorded in July 1973 at Madison Square Garden and mixed at Electric Lady Studios by Jimmy Page and Eddie Kramer. It was recorded by Eddie Kramer, and that was the biggest Presence of 1976. And The Song Remains the Same film, which Peter Grant, the band's manager, may he lay in peace, called the movie the world's biggest, most expensive home movie. It combined footage of the band performing at Madison Square Garden with close-ups filmed in 1974 of the band at Shepperton Studios to recreate the Madison Square Garden footage. You'll know the differences from seeing John Bonham with a wig, with his teeth fixed, Robert Plant with his teeth fixed, and John Paul Jones wearing that confounded wig, and Jimmy Page's hair is slightly shorter. Again, thank you, JCM, for helping me with those corrections. Well, I knew that Bonzo and Plant had their teeth fixed, and I knew that Bonham had to wear a wig in 74 because his hair was shorter. Also, Song Remains the Same featured, in addition to the band performances, fantasy sequences. In Jimmy Page's fantasy sequence, he was depicted as the Hermit of the Tarot on the front of the Led Zeppelin, in the gatefold of the Led Zeppelin 4 album, and also Climbing Up the Mountain, which that was filmed in December of 1973. On a moonlit night, yeah, Dancing with the Moonlit Night, as Genesis once wrote. That was filmed in December 1973. John Paul Jones filmed his foray into acting, recreating a scene from The Sin, riding horseback wearing a mask, leading a brutal mission in a dark cemetery, and then to come back to his family, kind of metaphor in life on the road for rock and rollers. And I'll talk more about that in the future, but I'm glossing over it right now. And then, of course, the other bit of his fantasy sequence was shot at Alexandria Palace in 1974, wearing that stinking wig, playing a theater organ, which was which was created by Movie Magic. I mean, John Paul Jones did not play the actual Alexandria Palace organ, but a Movie Magic version. And then Robert Plant's fantasy sequence depicted him as a Celtic warrior on boat, on horseback, to rescue a damsel in distress, only to find her vanish before his eyes. Oh boy. And that was filmed actually in 1974, a month after the Shepperton footage was shot. Little did we know. And then, of course, John Bonham's fantasy sequence was just him at his family farm with his prized automobile collection and doing his other thing, carpentry and playing snooker, as the British would call it. We call it playing pool and racing his cars. And John Bonham was a automobile junkie. I mean, he had cars, he had motorcycles. So he just chose to be himself, be with his wife and his son at the Bonham farm, with him work with his cattle, his cars, his motorcycles, racing automobiles. Man, oh man. And Peter Grant and Richard Cole and Roy Harper were depicted as gangsters, true to their form, to wipe out the evil guards. Not evil guards, but the evil buggers, gangsters that were metaphor for the record industry, who were total scumbags in those days. And that film I saw in September of '85 for the first time as a 9-year-old kid. Loved it then, and it sort of just piped my fancy further into Zeppelin. And then I got the soundtrack album in January of '86 for my 10th birthday. Yeah, my dad was kind enough to buy me the tape. The double cassette for my 10th birthday was actually 2 cassette tapes, because it would have been too long to fit on one extended length tape. So they had to put it on 2 cassette tapes so the tapes would not squeak, but then they would have squeaked anyway. The film, the soundtrack album, was released around the same time as the film, and the film, like I said, was very successful at the box office. Fans loved it, but Atlantic Records exec Ahmet Ertegun reportedly fell asleep at the screening of the film. And the film, and Peter Grant said about the movie, it was the most expensive home movie ever. Quick Summary was released in October 76, and it actually outsold Presence by, I think, a couple extra million copies. Yeah, most certainly did, and went all the way to number 2 on the Billboard album chart, only to be kept on number 1 by Stevie Wonder's masterpiece double album Songs in the Key of Life. The song remains the same for a live album, because it was at the height of live album mania. Did huge. And the songs on the original record were rock and roll. I think better than the studio version. Most people think I'm nuts for saying it. Celebration Day, first time I ever heard that song, was on The Song Remains the Same. So yeah, I prefer the live version to the studio version any day of the week, twice on fucking Sunday. The title track, The Song Remains the Same, originally from Houses of the Holy. Live version, definitive version. The Rain song, epic live. You know, like I said, some of these I heard live first before I heard their studio counterparts. Like Song Remains the Same, Rain Song, Celebration Day. Dazed and Confused at 26 minutes and 53 seconds. My God. If people don't like this long version of it, and they say How the West Was Won was better, clean out your ears, because How the West Was Won to me was just Robert playing too screechy. So what if the band was tired? The performances were better on Song Remains the Same. Plus, I think it was a better live album anyway. No quarter on the album. My God. All 12 and a half minutes of it. It's hard to believe that they edited it for the film, but on the album you get it in full. Same thing with the Rain song. Stairway to Heaven, amazing live, extended by 3 minutes for more Jimmy Page guitar solo pyrotechnics. Moby Dick, the drum solo that sort of made me become a drummer very early on in life. That drum solo fucking ruled. Especially when he did part of the drum solo with his bare hands and also parts where he did with the timpani. And if you listen to the film and the album versions, the original album from 76, they differed significantly. And then on the soundtrack album, you get the full 14 and a half minutes of Whole Lotta Love. In the film, it was edited by, I think, 30 seconds. And the edits were pretty bad in the film on the music, but on the original album, they left in the reference to the crunge. Yeah, I love the crunge. I'm just trying to find the bridge. Has anybody seen the bridge? Oh my God. Into the, the jam, and then the theremin section with the band just jamming. All 14 and a half minutes of it. Amazing. And then 31 years later, the album was remixed and re-released as a remastered deluxe edition, which brought the original album with some different performances to the original album and some songs that were not in the original album and not in the original film. And it was remixed by Kevin Shirley, who did the mixing on the How the West Was Won album and the Led Zeppelin DVD, with the track listing expanded to rock and roll, matching the film version now, so the original version is on the original album. You'll have to have both versions to compare and contrast. Celebration Day, different on the remixed remaster compared to the original album. Black Dog with Bring It On Home intro. Amazing. Matches the film, same version, without any of the overdubs found in the original film. Over the Hills and Far Away, oh yeah, much better than the original version, it's better than the version on How the West Was Won, because that was premiered before the album was released. The one on The Song Remains the Same expanded edition, I think Robert Plant's vocal delivery was better. He had to improvise a few things, but who gives a fuck? I think it was better in my opinion. Misty Mountain Hop live, not in the original film nor the album. Great addition. Since I've Been Loving You, which should have been on the original album. Perfect addition. It's the same version as in the film, but to have an audio release, brilliant. No Quarter now matches the version in the film instead of having that dun 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 dee 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 dee. That thing was shortened. Then The Song Remains the Same as on the original album, but without the overdubs and flange on Robert Plant's voice. The Rain song, same as on the original album, except Robert Plant's delayed flange during the Talk to Me. I felt the coldness of my winter part was now just mixed with delay, no flange. The flange was taken out. And then disc 1 ends with The Ocean, which was actually the encore, which was on the Led Zeppelin DVD of 2003, but not on the original album or the original film either, for that fact. Dazed and Confused is longer than the original soundtrack album on the 2007 reissue, so it matches the film version. So like I said, it's great to have both versions of Dazed and Confused, because there's some things on the original mix that weren't on the remix, like the ending drum fill, some of the bits. So just like any live version of Dazed and Confused. The Madison Square Garden tapes, brilliant. Stairway to Heaven, Robert Plant's overdubs were removed. Moby Dick, shorter than the original album, but it's matching the version that appeared in the film. Heartbreaker was not on the original album, but thankfully it is in full, and the full song, unlike in the film where they only had like 2 minutes of it. On the reissue of the album, it's at 6 minutes and 19 seconds, and then a slightly shorter version of Whole Lotta Love, without the grunge section, which pissed some people off, including a couple of people I used to associate myself with who hated the grunge. But I love it. And what I liked about the 2007 reissue was it was remastered by the king of remastering, Bob Ludwig, who did, ironically, the mastering on Led Zeppelin 2 of the original vinyl record, and the mastering on Houses of the Holy. So yeah, Bob Ludwig did the remastering in 2007, sounded great. And then another remaster was done in 2018, which is the current CD that's available. Sounds phenomenal, and it's also been reissued in a multi-disc Super Deluxe box set, Blu-ray audio with high-resolution stereo and new 5.1 surround mix, 180-gram vinyl box set, the 2 CD set, and this is based on the 2007 remixed remaster of the album, and it concluded the Led Zeppelin reissue campaign that had started 4 years earlier in 2014. My God, the song remains the same. You know that I love that album. The song remains the same as my favorite hard rock metal live album in history. You know, nothing topped it. If anyone doesn't like the fact that I put this over Kiss Alive, so be it. I put this over Judas Priest Unleashed in the East. How do you like those marbles? Oh my God. You know, I'm sticking to my guns, and if they don't like what I'm saying, well, so be it. 1977 finally saw Led Zeppelin do their proper tour for the Presence album, and the soundtrack to the song remains the same. The tour was supposed to start in February, March, but Robert Plant had a case of laryngitis, which pushed the start of the tour back to April. And the band rehearsed for the tour at Emerson, Lake and Palmer's rehearsal studio called Manicore Cinema in Fulham, London. And because of Robert Plant's illness, the band were without instruments for a while, and Jimmy Page did not have a guitar to play, because all of Led Zeppelin's equipment were shipped over to the United States. But in April of 1977, Led Zeppelin finally began their North American tour, but it was plagued with some problems. Jimmy Page had now developed a bad heroin addiction and cocaine, so he was doing both, and he was chain-smoking just to get through the performances to curb off his craving for heroin. Prior to that, he was a non-smoker. Robert Plant was, he was going all right through much of the tour until a disaster occurred in that July, which I'll bring up in just a bit. John Paul Jones, things went pretty smoothly, and drummer John Bonham was beginning to drink more and more and turning into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde when he would have a little too much to drink. So, some performances like Cleveland went well, but then Chicago, Jimmy Page got sick and had to try and do part of the show sitting down with stomach cramps, but they had to abort the show after an hour. Then, when they played Tampa, Florida, Mother Nature curtailed that performance with a heavy, violent rainstorm in Tampa Stadium after, I think, just one song, or just as the show began, a torrential, thunderous downpour put an end to Led Zeppelin's performance in Tampa. Excuse me. The performances at the Capitol Center in Washington, D.C., thankfully went off without glitch, as did performances at Madison Square Garden in New York, where many people attended that show, including at one show actress Linda Blair, who was an attendee at one of the shows. I know this from reading the Led Zeppelin forums. They brought that up. Then they did shows at the Forum in L.A., in Los Angeles, where at one show, Keith Moon joined in during John Bonham's drum solo and saying, "Whip Buddy Rich's ass," amongst other things. It was one of the best shows of the tour. That show, and then during Bonham's solo, where John Bonham was wailing on the timpani, Keith Moon sat behind John Bonham's drum kit and did a drum solo of his own. That would have been a sight to behold. And those shows went very well in Los Angeles, as did the show in Seattle, Washington at the Kingdom. But then after that, things just sort of slowly went to hell in a handbasket. In July of 1977, as the band was about to finish the tour, troubles once again beset the band. At Oakland Alameda Coliseum, which was a baseball stadium where the Oakland Athletics baseball team plays, that's when they had Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson had just left the A's to join the Yankees. That, I think around that time. In Oakland, California, at the home of the Oakland Athletics baseball team, a security officer was severely beaten by members of Led Zeppelin's entourage. The security officer was one of Bill Graham, the promoter's men, who struck manager Peter Grant's son, Warren, for taking a sign that his dad requested. The security man hit the kid, and Peter Grant was livid that his son got hit, and Peter Grant, John Bonham, who was off stage during Jimmy Page's guitar solo, John Bindon, all beat the living hell out of the security officer, with Led Zeppelin tour manager Richard Cole standing in front of the caravan, the Winnebago, where the beatdown took place. 4 people were arrested and fined over that incident, including Richard Cole, John Bindon, drummer John Bonham, and the band's manager Peter Grant. Immediately following that incident, Jimmy Page went to Los Angeles to check out some Roland guitar synthesizers because he was in line to buy one of the first guitar synths. John Paul Jones went off camping, whilst drummer John Bonham and lead singer Robert Plant and tour manager Richard Cole flew to New Orleans to prepare for the band's largest ever North American concert, largest North American date in their entire career. Shortly after they got to the hotel, Robert Plant got a phone call from his wife Maureen in England that their 5-year-old son Carrick had a stomach infection. And it was a pretty harrowing experience because Robert's daughter had that same illness and was treated. But an hour later, after Robert got the call that Carrick was sick, an hour later, Robert got wind that stomach infection had killed his 5-year-old son. His son Carrick died at the age of 5 from a bad stomach infection. Robert Plant, John Bonham, and Richard Cole immediately flew back to England, and the rest of the tour was canceled. Led Zeppelin would not ever again tour the United States. And the only people that were at Robert Plant's son's funeral was John Bonham, who was there for his bandmate and his friend, Robert Plant at his time of need, and tour manager Richard Cole. So that touring cycle for Presence / Song Remains the Same, which happened a year after, turned out to be kryptonite for Led Zeppelin. And sadly, Led Zeppelin would not ever again tour North America after 1977. Now, at the end of this Led Zeppelin episode here on TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast, I want to bring to you a Led Zeppelin update. The Led Zeppelin update is the movie Becoming Led Zeppelin is in theaters, hopefully soon on streaming devices, and they should put out a DVD or Blu-ray, because if that's the case, I'm sure as hell gonna buy the movie, because learning more about Led Zeppelin is always a good thing. Robert Plant's still doing his solo thing. John Paul Jones has finally gone back to playing live again. And Jimmy Page, he just recently reissued the Live at the Greek with the Black Crowes that came out originally in 1999 and 2000. And hopefully we will have another Jimmy Page album at some point. We don't want to lose him. And Robert Plant needs to get back to making a decent solo album. His last great solo album, I think, was a Strange Sensation from 2005. But on that note, let's go to picks of the moment. And my picks of the moment belong in the Led Zeppelin vernacular. Pick of the moment A would be the original 1976 mix of The Song Remains the Same. The original 1976 release, I agree with JCM. the definitive version with Rock and Roll, Celebration Day, the title track, the Rain Song, Dazed and Confused, No Quarter, which is the full version, with the best guitar solo that Jimmy Page ever did, Stairway to Heaven, Moby Dick, and Whole Lotta Love. And also, I think I might as well throw in, for kicks and measures, the deluxe edition of Presents, which brings the remastered album, and the second disc, which is the rough mix of Achilles' Last Stand called Two Ones Are One, aka the Wheelchair Song. Also, For Your Life early mix. Also, 10 Carats, Pod, that beautiful instrumental that should have had lyrics and turned into a proper song. Royal Orleans with John Bonham on the lead vocal. People can say it's Robert Plant, but it's John Bonham, alright? And of course, last but damn sure not least, early rough mix of Hot's On for Nowhere with some alternate vocal phrasings. Those are my picks of the moment, and before I go, here are some recommendations for podcasts and radio shows and YouTube channels for you fans to give your love to, and to quote General MacArthur, I shall return. Check out The Rockin' Tours with Guy Pratt and Gary Kemp, both from Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets. Also check out Eddie Trunk's podcast. How can anyone not like Eddie Trunk? It's humanly impossible. And of course the Chris Jericho podcast, Y2J for the Win. And the following YouTube channels: Michael Borland's Classic Rock channels on YouTube, John Bowden's various Classic Rock YouTube channels. He's awesome. Freeform Rock podcast with my buddy Mark Alden Taylor. That's recommended as well. The Villain Cult podcast with Roy Dam, Eric Lawton, and Mike Lockhart. How can anyone not like those guys? Classic Rock Review. That's recommended. The Professor of Rock. Darren Locke, he's recommended. He's funny. He's deadpan British humor, but God bless him. Melinda Murphy's channel's recommended. Brandon Snyder, great YouTuber. Pete Pardo, Sea of Tranquility. The Man, the Myth, the Legend. And my new favorite, JCM Led Zeppelin Stories. Jose is the king of Led Zeppelin, and the man who's got more copies of In Through the Outdoor than any other human being I know in my life. He has about 50 some odd copies of it. And his YouTube channels and his deep dives into Zeppelin things, awesome. And if you're not a Zeppelin fan, check out his channel. You'll be very surprised, guaranteed. Then again, he's the same dude who got me into Santana as of late. JCM, I want to thank you for that, brother. And you're more than welcome to come on my show, and you and I definitely will have to do a collaboration one of these days. We'll have to figure out the time and the place. So before I go, here's some recommendations for other podcasts and so forth and so on. I want you fans to give your love to, and to quote General MacArthur, I shall return.
This is Mark Alden Taylor from the Freeform Rock Podcast, where we rock and roll all night and party every day. Come check us out on iTunes and Podbean. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Chris.
And we're from the Decibel Geek Podcast. And if you love this...
then you'll love us.
That's right. Brand new episode every single Monday. You can find us on iTunes and at decibelgeek.com. And the best thing is, it's rock and roll and it's always free.
Mistress Carey reporting for duty. That's right. After rocking the airwaves in Boston for 22 years on WAAF, welcome to the Mistress Carey Podcast. And if you love rock, this weekly podcast is for you. I'll introduce you to new bands that I think you are going to love, and keep you in touch with the bands that are already your favorites. I'll take you backstage and expose you to the people behind the rock. Plus, we'll talk about everything else that we know and love, like motorcycles, tattoos, skydiving, hot rods, food, booze, and so much more. And let's not forget all of the branches of our military, our veterans, and first responders. Everything you know and loved about the Mistress Carey show, but now I'm unfiltered and uncensored. Fuck yeah! And if you never heard me before, well, welcome to the party. Subscribe now so you don't miss Mistress Carey Podcast.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency.
Brain damage with Pink Floyd.
This stuff can give you brain damage.
The Pink Floyd radio show.
Use only as directed.
There is no downside in the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all
Your controls are set to the Random Precision Radio Network. This is Floydie and Slip, an hour of Pink Floyd. I'm Craig Bailey. Find us online at floydieandslip.com. Write to us at pink@floydieandslip.com. Floydie and Slip is a Random Precision production.
You're listening to Nights with Alice Cooper. I think my Speedo is starting to cut off the flow of oxygen to my head. And that's why I got so
Temperamental with anyone who has the impertinence to question his wisdom and, hello, hypothesis inner courier.
Hi, and welcome to In the Studio. Redbeard here with the stories behind history's greatest rock and roll albums. Follow In the Studio on Facebook, at Redbeard Rocks on Twitter, and online at inthestudio.net.
Well, my friends, that wraps up another episode of TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast, From the Vault episode for this time being. But come back next episode and we will have a new episode that I have not ever aired before, that I've recorded a long while back, but for some reason I held in releasing it until now. That being Aerosmith, Toys in the Attic. Yeah, I have the episode recorded, but I have not ever edited it. Now will be my chance because that album just celebrated its golden anniversary. A. B. I can't do a podcast without Aerosmith, the bad boys from my home state capital of Boston. And C. When they were, between 1973 and 1989, they did no wrong. And there's going to be other episodes coming soon. Steve Miller Band Retooled. Iron Maiden, another Judas Priest episode I'll be recording. I'll be doing quite a few things. Some old but new, from the vaults recordings. I have to take out as many profanities as possible. The long-awaited episode on Pieces of Eight from Styx. I got so much I gotta do. Cornerstone, I meant to say, but c'est la vie. So this is TJR, Terrence Reardon, thanking you all for watching. I love you all. You all kick ass. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Good night. God bless you. TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast was written, produced, hosted, so on and so forth by yours truly, the classic rock brainiac, Terrence Reardon. The intro music and the outro music is by the one and only Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin from the Death Wish 2 soundtrack. Copyright 2025 TJR Rock Sponge Incorporated. All rights reserved. Once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Good night, my friends. God bless you.